The man's hand trembled as he pressed the cold barrel of the pistol against the side of the young woman's head. Passengers froze in their seats, breaths caught in throats, eyes wide with silent terror. The narrow airplane cabin had turned into a prison suspended thousands of feet above the earth. A hijacker shouted orders in a language most did not understand, but the intent was unmistakable: total submission or certain death. At the heart of the chaos sat the woman. Her hands rose slowly, palms open, her dark eyes steady though her chest tightened with fear. Others wept around her, but she sat in silence. Not a word, not a cry. She was neither defiant nor broken. She was still. Her composure unsettled the men pointing weapons at her. They barked louder, demanding visible fear, demanding the trembling compliance of prey, yet she gave them none. Her silence became the loudest sound in the cabin. It was then that another man, broad-shouldered, older, with gray streaks at his temples and the unmistakable bearing of command, fixed his eyes on her. He was no ordinary passenger. The quiet steel in his gaze revealed it. A man who had walked through fire, a man who had worn the trident of the Navy SEAL. He read her silence not as fear, but as readiness, and in a motion so swift and deliberate it seemed almost impossible under such threat. He removed his sidearm, concealed at his waist, and pressed it firmly into her hand. She had been silent through every threat, every insult, every shove from the men with guns. But silence was never weakness. It was patience. It was restraint. And in that moment, the cabin, heavy with fear, shifted. Something unseen awakened. She was not merely a random passenger. Once, she had worn the uniform herself. Once, she had lived in the dust and heat of combat zones, where the sound of helicopters was a lullaby, and the smell of gunpowder lingered like perfume. Years had passed since she left that life behind, trading steel for softness, battles for books. But ghosts never left her. She carried them, each one whispering in her ears as the hijackers barked threats. The faces of comrades who never came home, the weight of promises made in blood. She remembered the day she left the service. Her hands shook as she folded her uniform for the last time. She had stood in front of a mirror, staring at the woman who had given everything. Her strength, her youth, even her heart, to wars fought far from home. Her father had begged her to quit long before, telling her no medal was worth the cost of her peace. But it wasn't until she held the dog tags of her closest friend, a friend she had promised to bring back alive, that she realized he was right. She had carried those tags ever since, tucked in her pocket now as she sat between hostages and hijackers, the cold metal pressing against her thigh like a heartbeat from the grave. The plane became quieter, as though even the frightened children sensed the shift. The SEAL commander knew what he had done. He had given her not just a weapon but a choice, and with it, a burden heavier than the steel in her hand. She lowered her eyes for a brief second, and in that single heartbeat, memories flooded her. Nights lit by tracer fire, hands stained with blood that soap never fully washed away, voices cut short mid-laughter, replaced by silence. The hijacker snarled, gesturing wildly, pressing the muzzle harder against her temple. Passengers closed their eyes, praying the end would not be violent. Yet she did not flinch. The weight of the sidearm against her skin was familiar, like an old companion. She could feel the grooves, the balance, the trigger's promise. But more than that, she felt the silence inside herself. Not the silence of fear, but of unshakable control. There was a law in her world once. You don't waste bullets, and you don't waste words. She lived by both. Her silence taunted the hijackers more than any insult could. They thrived on panic, but she offered none. They thrived on obedience, but her stillness was rebellion. One of them screamed, demanding she beg for mercy. Instead, she looked into his eyes and thought. Mercy was not his to grant. The SEAL commander leaned closer, his voice low, only for her to hear. His words were not an order, not a plea, but a recognition. You know what to do. And with that, the world shifted again. There comes a moment in every battle when fear either destroys or transforms. Her moment had arrived. She gripped the sidearm, her breath steady. The plane, full of passengers too terrified to move, seemed to pulse with anticipation. The hijackers, emboldened by their power, were too blind to see that their control was already slipping. She thought of her fallen friend, of the promises made in foxholes and trenches. She thought of the children on board, clutching their mothers. She thought of the man beside her, handing her his trust, his weapon, his faith. And then, in a whisper inside her own mind, she thought, this ends here. The power shift was invisible at first, a silent current running beneath the chaos. It lived in the way her shoulders straightened, in the way her eyes no longer reflected fear but fire. The hijacker holding the gun to her head felt it before he understood it. For the first time since storming the cabin, he hesitated. And in battle, hesitation is death. She did not shout. She did not warn. She did not waste breath. With precision born of countless drills, she moved, swift, certain, inevitable. The cabin erupted in chaos, passengers ducking, gasps turning to cries, but within the storm she was calm. The silence within her had become action, the stillness before the strike. In seconds that stretched into eternity, the hijackers realized their mistake. They had mistaken her silence for weakness. They had mistaken her stillness for surrender. And in doing so, they had armed the very spirit they sought to break. When the dust of the struggle settled, the plane did not echo with celebration. It echoed with silence, heavy, profound, reverent. Passengers looked not at the SEAL commander, nor even at the subdued hijackers, but at her. The woman who had sat in silence until the moment's silence no longer sufficed. She looked at the weapon in her hand, then lowered it gently. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft but carried through the cabin like a bell. Silence is not fear. Silence is waiting, and waiting is power. The SEAL commander met her eyes. A nod passing between them, a recognition of battles fought, sacrifices made, and the unspoken bond of warriors who carry their ghosts together. Around them, passengers slowly rose. Some cried, some clasped their hands together in gratitude, some bowed their heads. Respect was not asked for. It was given freely, silently, overwhelmingly. In that cabin, thousands of feet above the earth, strangers united not by fear but by awe. Later, as authorities boarded and the world outside prepared to make headlines of the ordeal, she sat quietly again, her gaze distant. She knew the story would spread. Words would twist, headlines would sensationalize, but what mattered had no name, the moment when silence saved lives, when stillness held the strength of storms. She carried her friend's dog tag still, fingers brushing over the worn metal. She whispered in her mind, as though to him. I kept my promise, and in that moment, every watching soul understood something deeper. True strength is not in the loudest shout or the fastest draw. True strength lives in the quiet, in the patience, in the courage to act only when the moment demands. If you are watching now, consider what silent battles you carry. Consider the strength hidden within the moments when you say nothing but hold everything. Heroes do not always roar. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they sit in silence, until the world hands them the choice to rise. Tell me, where are you watching from? What battles have shaped your silence? Share your thoughts, and if this story has touched you, subscribe for more stories that honor those who live and fight with silent strength.